1953. Whoo! I have a lot to talk about on this one, so let's just jump right in. Walt Disney makes his last great win during his lifetime. Yeah, I thought Walt Disney would have been obsolete thanks to UPA and Warner Brothers, but nope, he just kept chugging right along. Toot, whistle, plunk, and boom is certainly an interesting footnote in his career. It and its predecessor, Melody Time, were part of a very short-lived series called Adventures in Music, supposedly done while he was away in Europe. Here's how influential UPA was. Even Disney had to use tricks from it. This film and its predecessor was the result of Ward Kimball deciding to see if he could translate UPA's style to Disney. And to many, he did the impossible and succeeded. These films were Ward Kimball's directorial debut. Kimball was part of a group of people known as the 9 Old Men. These were the 9 animators that Disney considered to be what actually shaped his studio. The ones that embodied his philosophy the most. And they were named the 9 Old Men after a snide comment made by an opponent of FDR over his judges. Or something like that. But anyhow, many of these 9 Old Men are revered in the industry. And Ward Kimball is widely considered to be the most skilled and eccentric of them. He specialized in comedic affairs mostly, but there were times in which he could produce serious experimental stuff like this. Now, you might think that Walt Disney was pleased with this success, and with the Adventures in Music thing in general, except he wasn't. Disney was staunchly anti-communist, and he hated UPA after it came to light that several of its founders had associations with communism. And this hit Disney particularly hard because, as we all know, UPA was largely made up of people who parted from Disney following the 1941 strike. So, when he came back from Europe and saw these films, Disney went no more of this UPA crap and demoted Ward Kimball back to an animator. Why Kimball decided to stay on, I have no idea. This would not be the last time Kimball directed, thankfully, but wow. Speaking of UPA, this is the Academy Awards ceremony that showed just how influential they were. So what did UPA themselves have to offer? Well, second place, but I hope you got a strong nerve. The Telltale Heart, an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's short story of the same name. Directed by Ted Parmalee in the unit of Pete Burness. Featuring narration by James Mason and animation solely done by Patrick Matthews. This is UPA taken to its logical extreme, featuring barely any animation at all. It's just still images. And this film is not meant to be funny. And usually that would be an insult during this time period because the theatrical sort system is still in full swing and we see Warner Brothers and all that type of stuff. But no, this film was not meant to be funny. That's the difference between crap and genius when it comes to not funny stuff. It is actually quite terrifying and has been shown in many a school. How scary is this film? Despite having no blood, language, or any sexual content whatsoever, the absolutely scary atmosphere of the short led it to be rated X in the United Kingdom, something no other animated film had done before up until that point. And this film is incredibly scary. Everything about it is scary. It captures Edgar Allan Poe's signature style perfectly, and it just gels right in with UPA. Yes, indeed. It is true that we are all insane and just think that we are sane until something drives us mad. Like the weather outside, for example. Have you noticed? Snow. It's springtime and it's snowing. This world has gone mad. I certainly might have gone mad myself. Okay, enough of the scary crap. Back to the award ceremony. Here's something more mainstream from UPA. Christopher Crumpet, a jolly frolic that is actually a jolly frolic. Directed by Robert Cannon, it tells the story of a 2-year boy who wants an actual live-scale government rocket, and anytime he doesn't get his way, he turns into a chicken. Fairly funny stuff, and it received a follow-up in 1955 called Christopher Crumpet's Playmate, which he doesn't turn into a chicken, but the gimmick there is that he has an invisible elephant friend. Fourth place is perhaps the most normal of the bunch. Rugged Bear by Donald Duck. Rugged Bear, part of the Donald Duck series, was directed by Jack Hanna and features the only appearance of Humphrey Bear at the Academy Awards. He was a very neurotic bear who often got into tussles with the fowl. But towards the end of the Disney's classic life, he got some shorts all to his own. After Jack Hanna left Disney for Walter Lantz, he created a similar character known as Fatso. A really similar character. And speaking of Disney, their fortunes had thankfully improved by this point. They had spent most of the 40s from 1942 onward making package films that weren't really full-fledged films so much as they were several short films stitched together and given usually a live-action wraparound. Many of these short subjects in these films were repackaged as standalone films as part of the Silly Symphony series. And they include Fun Fancy Free, the one with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy going through the Jack and the Beanstalk thing, going through an adaptation of Jack and the Beanstalk. The Three Calaberos and Saludos Amigos, which introduced the titular Three Calaberos, which are relatives of Donald Duck and friends that he likes to go along with, that portray South America in a positive light thanks to the war effort. And other fantastic shorts like Melody Time or The Adventures of Ichabod and Toad. Well, in 1950, Disney managed to scrape enough money to make an actual full-length feature film again. Cinderella. This film was a hit and marked the second appearance of a Disney princess after Snow White. Yeah, Walt Disney didn't deal with Disney princesses that much. After Cinderella came Alice in Wonderland in 1951, which received positive reviews but completely bombed at the box office and undid Cinderella's success. This did not discourage Walt from making full-length animated films, though, and Peter Pan, released this year in 1953, was actually another success. So, really, it all boiled down to releasing them at the right place at the right time. They were positively received, they just needed to be released at the right time. Fun fact, that was also the last film to have all involvement of Disney's 9 old men. And I covered one of them, Ward Kimball. But that won't be the last time that we see the 9 old men. No, far from it. But if Disney's doing great, how's their rival Warner Brothers doing? Well, nobody caught the UPA bug better outside of UPA than Warner Brothers, chiefly Friz Freleng and Chuck Jones. From A to ZZZZ was one of his UPAS films, starring a little young boy named Ralph Phillips, whose daydreams are shown in fantastic, very imaginative detail. The studio was in a rough patch, unfortunately, during this point. 1953 saw the release of Lumberjack Rabbit, a Bugs Bunny cartoon that was supposed to be in 3D. It was even advertised as being in 3D, but unfortunately, the decision to have it be in 3D came when it was nearing the end of production, and Chuck Jones did not want to go through with it and did not edit the film. Realizing the film received meh reviews at best, and was criticized universally for not taking advantage of 3D in spite of the fact that the film was advertised as being a 3D film. The only hint of actual 3D in the film is the opening, in which the shield zooms way too close to the screen before correcting itself into the proper position. Eddie Seltzer was horrified, and he realized that this 3D thing might be a fad. Might be just a fad. And it was just that, a fad. It wouldn't be until several brief revivals afterwards and the late 2000s that it became a mainstay. So, in the middle of 1953, and lasting until the beginning of 1954, Edward Seltzer decided to shut the studio down. This was also, granted, it was also because their backlog was getting a little too big, but although it did accomplish its goal of allowing the studio to avoid the 3D craze, it caused many of the higher tier talents of the studio, i.e., the whole of Robert McKimson's unit, to leave. And that is going to force the studio to start actually adapting to the UPA style very quickly. Though much of the staff still remained, again, outside of Robert McKimson's unit, which was nuked. I'll get to that later. Speaking of technical thingamabobs, 1953 was the year of 3D in animation, after the creature from the Black Lagoon popularized it. Walter Lantz, Paramount, and Disney also took cracks at the whole 3D thing. But none of these installments were overly successful. Yeah. Paramount in particular did 2 of them as opposed to 1. Popeye and the Ace of Space and Captain Spur and Boom Boom. They were marketed as stereo tunes. In fact, Disney's Adventures in Music Melody Time short was actually the very first animated film shot in 3D. Toot Whistle Plunk and Boom, however, was done with a much more experimental, much more easier process that caught on. It was the first cartoon to use CinemaScope. This was a type of widescreen in which the screen was thinned way out in such a way that it actually curved at the ends, creating a very psychedelic effect. CinemaScope proved far more long-lasting than 3D and ultimately kept theatrical shorts afloat. MGM, Terrytoons, and UPA all use the CinemaScope technique and proudly touted that. So, yeah, 1953 was chaotic. Will next year be that chaotic? Stick around and find out. But until then, like, share, subscribe, and comment. This is the Man from Wackyland, notifying you all that was 1953.